the NHL playoffs are the best in sports. And watching Game 1 in the Eastern Conference Finals with the Florida Panthers and the Carolina Hurricanes, besides looking at Rob Brindamore's ugly, disgusting nose, was watching one of the greatest and longest games in NHL history. That was fantastic. Not only is it fun to watch, you watched a team that had no business making it to the Eastern Conference Finals, knocking off a Boston Bruin team that everybody thought was unbeatable. The best goalie in the NHL by far this year, breaking almost every single goaltending record any goalie in history's had in one season. Everybody was talking about Shesterkin's numbers last year. Oh my God, look at Allmark's numbers. He was pulled twice. In the final game of that series, Allmark didn't even start. Swayman did, their backup goalie. He lost his job in the middle of the first round of the playoffs. What does that tell you about the Florida Panthers? Shows grit, shows speed, shows attitude. And everybody was questioning the Florida Panthers and that trade in the offseason that sent one of their best offensive players and one of their best defensemen to Calgary for a young kid who wanted a lot of money from Calgary. Calgary didn't want to pay him. And Matthew Tkachuk, his father Keith, his brother Brady, which sent him to the Florida Panthers. And ever since that trade, they had a terrible beginning of the season. A lot of people thought they had no chance of making the playoffs.
Yeah, they had a lot of injuries. They had a lot of issues with their goaltending for a while, but were able to weather the storm just enough. And then a hot streak right at the end of the year, March into April, propelled them into those playoff spots. And once they got it, they really stuck with it, and they kept that hot streak going for a while. They took it to the Bruins. Even the games they lost, they played really hard in, too. They won Game 2 in Boston, and it really just sparked. And then they took it to the Toronto Maple Leafs, who finally won their first playoff series. You think they're on a high, all this offensive juggernaut. And the Florida Panthers defense has really been what's impressive, because that was the thing I wasn't so sure about, like their depth defensively. And Paul Maurice, I'll give him credit as a coach. Weird decision to fire their coach Brunette, who just led them to a President's Trophy, but Paul Maurice has brought that intensity he had in Winnipeg with those physical defensemen and physical forwards to Florida too, and it's really helped them a lot, especially Matthew Tkachuk defensively against a lot of these top wings.
For a player that had his best season last year with Calgary, to have back-to-back years, especially getting the big contract, you would think going to another team, his numbers were going to dip. His numbers didn't dip this year. 79 games, 40 goals, 69 assists, 109 points. He had a fantastic season on a Florida Panther team that was fighting injuries all year. His leadership and what he does in the big game, and that Game 4 overtime win, that goal was a fantastic shot. The goalie had no chance. But what this kid is and what this guy is all about only sells what the Florida Panthers are as an organization and what this team could do this year. Shock the world and go to the Stanley Cup Finals. Who I had winning this series, Florida. If Florida gets out of this series, they're winning the whole thing. I don't see Vegas beating them. I don't see Dallas beating them either. I think they can score with anybody. I think they have the best goalie right now in the playoffs still, Bobrovsky. I don't think there's any weaknesses in this team. The only thing that worries me about this team is youth. Being that they're so young, they don't have the experience being here. Carolina does. Rob Brindamore does. Paul Maurice, he's been a coach over 20 years in the NHL. He's been there before. But guys like Matthew Tkachuk, he's never been in this position before. None of these guys really have. This is a young team, and they could be good for many, many years. I think they're a year ahead of schedule right now in the Eastern Conference Finals. It would have been another year or two before this team really put things together. They have a very good farm system. Watching game number 1, the way it happened, this series could be a long series, but Florida proved why they're there. Florida is a special team this year. The only way Carolina is going to win this series is they're going to have to take their spirit out of their bodies. Nobody has done that so far. Boston couldn't do it. Toronto couldn't do it. Boston and Toronto were arguably the two best teams in the Eastern Conference. They ran right through both of them.
And a lot of that was because of the physicality of their forwards too, which is an issue that Toronto definitely has, an issue I had with the Rangers. And Florida defensively has really been good. And Carolina's a team that does not score even strength goals. Most of their goals, I think half their goals of the playoffs have been on the power play. They're not going to be able to have a sustainable track record being able to do it that way. In Florida, they had some penalties in the 4 overtime spans, but beyond that, throughout regulation, they were pretty good. If they could stay disciplined, stay out of the box, you're right, they could definitely take it to them. And it's a lot like the Nashville Predators, too. I think Nashville probably at the time was more talented, but Carolina's a team a lot like that Anaheim team, close but not quite getting over the hump, and Nashville is a surprise team. Same kind of thing with Florida.